Welcome to Research Talk. I hope you all are enjoying our journey together on phenomenology. We spent some time at the beginning of this series on the history of phenomenology. We covered some of the philosophies, some famous phenomenologists, Husserl, Heidegger, Merleau-Ponty, Sartre, and we also talked about what is a phenomenon in phenomenology, what is intentionality in phenomenology. So we have, in the whole section that we have covered, we try to cover the philosophy or philosophical roots of phenomenology. Now we are going to switch gears and move to methodology. So what we have covered will give you a sort of a basic understanding of phenomenology and some of the key concepts. Now we are moving towards the methods part, the methodology part, how the ideas from the philosophy has been borrowed to create research methodology to study objects, people around us. So as a researcher, now we are going to learn how these ideas that we have covered are going to be utilized in a research design. Before I jump into that, I want to talk about another thing to make sure you all understand that there is a difference between the term methodology and methods. So when somebody uses the word research methodology versus research methods, there is a difference. Sometimes we use it interchangeably, but we should be careful. So what is a research methodology? Research methodology is an umbrella term that include various approaches, various methods. So you could say research methodology is a broader research design with methods. While method, though when you use the word methods, research methods, this one research method, if I say I'm doing interview as a method of data collection, that's a method. If I'm using a particular way of coding or data analysis, that's a method. But when you hear the word methodology, it's the overall research design which include many methods in that. So in that sense, methodology is an umbrella term, a bigger term that encompasses other methods. So that's the difference between the word methodology and methods. So when you use it, use appropriately. Let's come back to phenomenology. Now, phenomenology, unlike other approaches, other methodologies, phenomenology has a variety of methodologies. And I think the reason is because it has such a broader, rich philosophy that many researchers have used ideas, methods from those from philosophy to create methods which are not exactly same. So in this video, I'm going to talk about 3 methodologies. We will cover one and then we will cover rest in our next videos. So the first methodology that we are going to cover is in phenomenology is Giorgi's Descriptive Phenomenology. The second one we are going to talk about is Max van Manen, and his phenomenology is called Hermeneutic phenomenology, while the Giorgi's is called Descriptive Phenomenology. And finally, we will cover another one, Dalberg's Reflective Lifeworld. There are other methodologies as well, but more or less, these are some very frequently used phenomenological methodologies that we see these days. So that's what we're going to do. We are going to start with Giorgi's, and then Max Venon's, and then Dalberg's reflective life word. Now, remember that each of these methodologies are inspired by a particular phenomenological tradition. For instance, Giorgi's descriptive phenomenology is inspired by Husserl. In fact, it is called a modified Husserlian phenomenology or descriptive phenomenology. So primarily inspired by Husserl. And then Max Manen's hermeneutic phenomenology is primarily inspired by both, but primarily by Heidegger. And the third one, Dalberg's reflective life word, is inspired by Husserl and Merleau-Ponty. So each tradition, each methodology that we see here, they are inspired by different philosophers from phenomenology. But it's more, I would say, integrated in nature, but there is a primary influence, primary focus. And as we see, Giorgi's descriptive is primarily from Husserl, Max von Venon's is more from Heidegger, and then Husserl and Merleau-Ponty, which is Dalberg's reflective life word. So we are going to study these three methodologies, phenomenological research methodologies, to understand it in more detail. So let's start with Giorgi's descriptive phenomenology. And we can learn more about, we'll talk in detail about some of the key features of this approach of conducting phenomenological research. So the first key feature of this particular methodology is description. I would say rich and thick description. The focus is on rich and thick description. What it means, under this methodology, you as a researcher, when you are collecting data about lived experiences, you are trying to collect as much description, as detailed, deep, thorough description of the phenomenon as possible. So what you do, you invite, let's say if you are doing interview, you are asking people questions in an effort to collect together as much description, as detailed description of the phenomenon you are investigating. So a very rich and thick description. As I said, the description that you are collecting, obviously the first one is from the people who have experienced the phenomenon. So you are collecting these descriptions from the people who have experienced the phenomenon. And you try to be as faithful while you are collecting this description as possible to the lived experience. Again, as I have been emphasizing, that as a researcher, you are trying to be as faithful to collect a detailed description of the phenomenon from the people who have experienced, who have lived experience of the phenomenon. And to do that, a very common method is interviews and writing of experience. Interviews you already know. Writing of experience is you can invite your participant or the people who are providing a rich, thick description of the phenomenon through writing. So that's another method you could use when it comes to collecting a rich and thick description of the phenomenon that you are trying to investigate. Now, so this is part of description, a very descriptive a detailed description of the phenomenon that you are collecting from the people who have lived experiences of the phenomenon. But descriptive phenomenology also focuses on a description from the researcher themselves, what it means. So when you are collecting the data, when you are analyzing the data, you are also engaged in description during your analysis. So it's more sort of, I would say, memoing that we do in other traditions. So it's like you are also involved in description based on what you are observing, based on your data collection activities, based on your data analysis activities. You are involved in a description of the phenomenon. It's like looking at the phenomenon from your lens, but that should be always not your, but it's like grounded in the description that you have been gathering. So description from both, from the people who have experienced the phenomenon, and also as a researcher, you are also engaged in describing the phenomenon based on your observation, based on your data. So one key feature of Giorgi's descriptive phenomenology is focus on detailed, rich, thick, deep description of the phenomenon. Now let's talk about the second characteristic. The second characteristic of descriptive phenomenology is attitude of phenomenological reduction. This term is invented by Husserl himself, and he used the term phenomenological reduction to describe the methodology to explore a phenomenon, to study a phenomenon. So what is the attitude of phenomenological reduction? So the first idea he propounded was epoch, which means bracketing or suspending one's biases, prior experience, your views, everything. So suspending all experiences of the external world. So when you are observing anything, first thing, you need to remove your own experience, suspend all your prior experience about the external world to see the object as it is. So that was the idea of bracketing or epoch that Husserl propounded, and it is used in descriptive phenomenology. However, Giorgi, he said that this is not feasible actually. Human beings are not like we don't have a switch off button that I switch off the button and all my prior experience and everything is suspended. All my prior biases, experiences, or viewpoints or theoretical understanding, everything is switched off. It doesn't happen that way. We human beings are conscious. So doing an epoch where I can suspend all my prior perceptions, understanding of the world, external world, is not feasible as Husserl tried. So he talked about psychological epoch, or you could say bracketing. What does it mean? Psychological is I'm trying to set aside my personal beliefs, experience, perceptions related to the phenomenon that I am trying to explore. So that's what it means, psychological phenomenological reduction. So rather than going for epoch that Husserl wanted, Giorgi talked about psychological phenomenological reduction. Another thing that Husserl as part of the phenomenological reduction he talked about was transcendental ego. What is transcendental ego? Husserl, in an effort to explain epoch better, he said a transcendental ego is a stage where yourself becomes such a kind of a pure observing self, meaning that you have completely bracketed, suspended your experience or perception of the external world. So pure observing self. So that was the idea of transcendental ego. There are some methodologies which are known as Transcendental Phenomenology. So when you hear the word Transcendental Phenomenology, the idea comes from here, Husserl idea of transcendental ego, which means that you as a researcher, you as an explorer, you suspend, you bracket your views, beliefs, experience of the external world, and as an explorer, you are having this pure observing self, which has transcended your day-to-day self, your day-to-day ego, and that transcendental ego is what he pointed it out here. So that is the second characteristic of descriptive phenomenology, and which is in descriptive phenomenology, instead of using bracketing, you use psychological bracketing or psychological phenomenological reduction as a way to study, to observe objects and people. The third characteristic of descriptive phenomenology by Giorgi is invariant meanings. So the focus or search for invariant meanings. Let's understand this, what it means when we say invariant meanings. So as I said, this methodology is inspired from Husserl. So Husserl used a word called essence. Essence of a phenomena. What Husserl argued that in intentionality, when as an observer you are observing something, this intentionality, this relationship has some universal, fundamental meanings. And as a researcher, what you do, so this universal structure of those experiences, fundamental of those experiences, that he called is essence. So as a Husserlian researcher, you try to understand the essence of a phenomenon. However, when Giorgi developed this descriptive phenomenology, he argued that this is not feasible because as a qualitative researcher, we are not searching for universal truth. Our primary focus is not, because whatever in qualitative research, if you remember, we are not focused on generalizability of the findings. We are focused on understanding the experiences, and obviously we look what might be some common across people in terms of the experiences that we are exploring. So as a qualitative researcher, Giorgi doesn't want to use the word essence. So instead of using the word essence, because he does not agree that there is a universal fundamental structure of intentionality or experience, so instead of using that, he used the word invariant meaning. Invariant meanings, in other words, is basically nothing but theme. You already have heard in qualitative research, what we do, we find themes that is emerging from the interviews or from observation data or other document analysis. What are some common themes emerging? So That's what Giorgi is talking about. He said it's invariant meanings. So when I say invariant meanings, it means themes. What are some themes emerging, some invariant meanings emerging from the data? So that's third characteristic of Giorgi's descriptive phenomenology. Now let's talk about some of the other methods which are being used in descriptive phenomenology. The first one in terms of data collection is unstructured interview. Unstructured interviews are a very common method under descriptive phenomenology to collect a rich and thick description. Again, remember, descriptive phenomenology focused on gathering data with a very rich, thick description of the lived experience. So unstructured interviews are often used. Another thing I have seen very commonly under descriptive phenomenology is, since you want a very rich and thick description of the phenomenon, it is not feasible sometimes to do that in one sitting with the participant. So what you conduct unstructured interview in multiple settings with the same participant. So I can have 2 to 3 interviews with one participant. So interview 1, interview 2, interview 3, and I can focus on different issues related to the phenomenon that I'm investigating. So unstructured interviews with multiple sittings is very common under this methodology. I'm using the word unstructured. I hope you already know what is unstructured interview, but I can just summarize it. Unstructured interview is an interview where you know the focus of your study, but you don't have questions, predetermined questions to use while you are gathering data, while you are talking to your participant, while you are doing interviews. So you don't have questions lined up, but you have a sense of direction. You have a clarity about the theme, but the focus of your study. And then you sit and try to collect as much description of the phenomenon as possible. So we call it unstructured interviews. And again, as I said, these unstructured interviews are focused on description, a detailed description of the phenomenon. Another thing in terms of methodology is data analysis. As I have been saying again and again, that this method is focused on collecting a very rich and thick description of the phenomenon. So the focus is solely on description. So when you are collecting the data, the focus is on try to get as much detailed description of the phenomenon as possible. And when you are doing the data analysis, at that time, you do not speculate. If there is an excerpt where you are not really sure about what the participant is describing, then you do not do any second guess. So no speculation when it comes to data analysis. No speculation. If there is an ambiguity, in terms of description, how the phenomenon has been described, how the participants are sharing their experience, if the description has any ambiguity, you do not do any second guess. You go back to your participant, talk to them again, and make sure that the description is complete, it's thorough, and it's clear. So no ambiguity. If there is any ambiguity, you do not engage as a researcher in any second guessing or speculation. You go back and get the description right. So that's another thing to keep in mind in this methodology. The third and most important is in terms of data analysis, which we use in descriptive phenomenology. We call it whole, part, whole analysis. We'll learn more about this. I'll have a whole detailed video on how to do whole part whole analysis, but here understand that whole part whole analysis is a way of data analysis in phenomenology, where as a researcher, when you look at an excerpt, so you read the literal meaning of that description, but then you also look at the overall context of that assertion or that excerpt. So you are doing part analysis and then looking that part from a holistic perspective, from an overall description of the participant, and try to make sure that you are getting the meaning, you are getting the description meaning right. And we call this whole part whole analysis, which is commonly used in phenomenological research studies. So that is briefly about descriptive phenomenology. It's a modified Husserlian approach, as we already discussed, that the focus of this particular approach, this particular methodology, is description. As a researcher, you focus on collecting, gathering a detailed, rich, thick description from the people who have experienced the phenomenon that you are investigating. In our next video, I'm going to talk about a new methodology, another methodology, which is Max van Manen's hermeneutic phenomenology. And remember, phenomenology is a very diverse, rich tradition. So you will see 5-6 types of phenomenological research design methodologies. So we are going to learn each one of them, and then when you are planning your dissertation or when you are planning your own study, designing it based on these characteristics of these various approaches, you can ask yourself, what is the most suitable research design, phenomenological research design, based on what I want to know. All right, so this is all about descriptive phenomenology. I'll see you again talking about talking about the next one. I'll see you soon. Thank you.